In the early part of the 20th century, Mexico was a country in turmoil. Economic and political conditions led to a full-scale revolution and gave rise to the legendary war figure Pancho Villa. But there was another revolution taking place to the north in the United States, the Industrial Revolution. Soon, Mexican immigrants began flowing across the border in search of better jobs and a better life for their families. Many immigrants found their way to the Midwest and the Quad Cities. Word had spread that there were jobs in manufacturing as well as the booming railroad industry. From humble beginnings, these immigrants built a better life for their families as they settled into neighborhoods, barrios, with names like Cook's Point, Holy City, and the Silvis Yards. They worked hard, they educated their children, they were now Americans. This is their story.
My parents came from León, Guanajuato, Mexico, to this country in the late 1800s. Then the Rock Island was seeking for employees and contacted them, and they came up to Silvis.
My dad came here in 1915. He traveled his way to made his way to through working on a railroad and the beet field, and then he come to Bettendorf, and he secured employment there in 1915. My uncle was working there, and told him to come to this country because leave the revolution alone and come here is money to be made, and there was something for the family, or you could make money and live happy and whatever it was. It was called the American Dream, what we call the American Dream.
We settled here in the yards where the Rock Island lines provided dwelling for all the people that came up here. And my dad worked for as a crane director in the yards there, which the buildings were so close to the boxcars where we lived and where I was born.
They must have lined this place up with a bunch of boxcars, and the families lived in them. They had numbers on them. I was born in boxcar 4, and that goes back to 1929. Had a good education there. Had a lot of fun. Grew up with, hey, we had fun. We had the whole hills. We could run up and down them. In winter, the creek would freeze. We made it ice. We had hills. We used to use curb rods, use them as skis.
Well, my mother was from Alabama, from Gadsden, Alabama. And my dad, he came in 1910. My father's name was Norberto Rodriguez. When he came across the International Bridge at El Paso, Texas, the Rock Island Railroad had some recruiters there, and they recruited him. And they moved into Holy City. That was an area where mostly Mexicans lived. And Holy City consisted of closest to the Bettendorf shops was some boxcars. I was born in one of those boxcars in number 8.
What I remember about Holy City is we didn't have electricity. We had kerosene lamps, and we had outhouses.
My family came to this country from Mexico in 1918, right after the Mexican Revolution. They landed in Davenport, Iowa, and lived in Cook's Point, which was the Barrio back then, in 1918, where most of the Mexican immigrants came.
As a little boy, I grew up in a place called Cook's Point, but back then, the railroad line company gave all the employees a boxcar to live in. So we lived in the boxcar. That was our first home. And then my dad was pretty handy with us with his hands. He could do carpenter work. And he started building us a house with scrap and that, scrap lumber and that. And so we moved into that house, and then other people started doing the same thing.
Families live in the most humble of dwellings. Railroad boxcars were converted into simple houses for the immigrant workers and their families. Many homes didn't have any running water or electricity. Life in the barrio wasn't easy, but proximity and shared experiences brought these families together, creating a fellowship and memories that will last a lifetime.
It was fun, but the older people, like my dad and mom, they were serious about it. But to us, it was kind of fun because we was all together. And it was fun because of your dad. It was one of the best years of your life because your dad and mom were living. And that made the great difference in your life. And the sacrifices they did to keep the family together. And I remember Dad used to sit all night with a potbelly stove, keeping the fire going so we could keep warm.
My father came here. He was an orphan, and he came from Aguascalientes, Mexico. My mother came here, she was born in Durango, Mexico. And my mother, when she came here in 1926, she settled in Indiana Harbor. And there she set roots in Indiana Harbor. And then she migrated to Cooks Point. In Cooks Point, there were approximately 60 families or so that lived there. So we knew so many of the families, the children that were there. So, I mean, we all went to Monroe School, Frank L. Smart, and then continued on to Davenport High School. I remember carrying the big buckets of water like a Dutchman over the shoulder. I would carry the water, let's say, almost a block or close to a block. And by the time we got home, there was too much water left. But we did that. I mean, that was our only means of drinking water that we had. There were other homes in Cooks Point that did have running water, but we were not one of those people.
Living in Holy City, that was the best part of my life. We were kids, and like I said, there was a river bank, and we'd go up above the river bank, and there was the river. You'd go on top of the bank, and there was a river, and we had a nice sandy beach. And in the summertime, we used to swim almost every day.
I grew up in what we consider Watertown, USA. And actually, it was a very nice neighborhood. It was a very diverse neighborhood. We didn't have a lot, but we didn't realize we didn't have a lot. Because we never went hungry, we never went homeless, and we may not have had the type of clothes that we wanted, but my mother was a fanatic about cleanliness.
Living in Cooks Point was, there were so many other children there that we just took life for what it was worth. We played with the kids, and we had the Mississippi River there to play on, especially when it froze. We kind of took our sleds and went down the Mississippi and did a little bit of sliding on the ice. We didn't have so-called formal ice skates. What we used for ice skates were regular, like corn cans or vegetable cans. We would take our foot and stomp in the middle of that can, and the can would, the sides would come up our foot, and those would be our ice skates that we would use on the Mississippi.
We played football and we played softball. Every little town had a semi-pro baseball team. One of the boys had a Model T Ford, so we go out and jump on it. We climb all the fenders and that and play ball, and that was our fun. Sometimes we stay out in the fields and we lay on the sacks and look at the sky and count the stars, the shooting stars, and gaze there. And we remember how wonderful world it was God created. And my dad used to tell us, well, son, You know, good things are coming one of these days. And it won't be long.
Outside of the settlements, segregation and discrimination were experienced in varying degrees by some. Many of the children enter school speaking limited English, but for the most part, adults and children alike easily absorb the culture and traditions of the new surroundings. They play sports, they ice skate in the winter, and they play music. Still, inside of the confines of these neighborhoods, in the barrios, Mexican culture was king.
The Mexican culture is woven around our love for our Catholic faith and the church. And I'll never forget those Christmases when they had what they called the posadas right before Christmas Day. And the posadas, they would go from house to house and say the rosary and offer prayers, and after the prayers they would have something to eat, you know, goodies. It was a custom that they carried through till they died, you know.
The weddings, the baptisms, every 16th of September, where now the park in Rock Island is with the armory, that was always, the whole family went, and that was always exciting. I mean, even though there wasn't a lot of funds, we all had beautiful dresses, long gloves. It was just, like in my neighborhood, we never grew up as neighbors, we grew up as family. And I think in that community years ago, and we're losing a little bit of it now, when we see each other as family, but not often enough. And unfortunately, the younger generation seems to be losing a little bit of that.
They had a lot of celebration. The families always got together, especially the women. You know, they shared their cookings and whatever one had the talent for, they went to her, and vice versa. And they had music, and they all enjoyed dancing. We had very talented men that played a lot of the instruments, so they always had music.
When you're in a foreign language and you hear your own music, of course you feel like, estoy en casa, I'm home. I think it gave happiness to our people to hear their music and to see their children develop their culture. Because at fiesta time to Our Lady of Guadalupe, and even at Christmas time for Las Posadas, they were able to maintain that culture. They were able to dance. They were able to see that it was all right for them to speak Spanish, to sing in Spanish, and to keep their dancing, their music culture.